How's it going, guys? This is dave.xp, and on this tutorial we're gonna take a look at the process of painting a mouth like this in Photoshop. So here we go. So I'm starting here with just two layers. We have the color palette with the colors that I already chose to use and a quick sketch for the mouth. Now I'm going to start by creating 3 more layers. These are going to be the 3 basic shapes that we're going to be using through the whole tutorial. So we have the bottom lip, the top lip, and the middle layer. Now first we're going to paint the top lip. So I'm going to color pick a shade of red. And remember, you can color pick any color that you want by just press and hold the Alt key and click on the color that you want to use. Now for the brush, I'm going to be using the hair brush. And there's a link, by the way, in the description where you can find these custom brushes. Now make sure that both the opacity and the flow of the brush are in 100%. And before I even start drawing the shapes, I'm just going to take the sketch layer and just lower the opacity. I do this just to have a better look at the new shape that I'm about to paint. Now we're going to again select the top lip layer and just start building the shape. Okay, now we're going to repeat the same steps for the bottom lip. But for this one, I'm just going to pick a slightly brighter color and just again start building the shape. Okay, now for the third layer, the middle layer, we're going to pick a darker shade of red. And I'm going to make the brush just a little smaller. The basic idea for this middle layer is to paint this very clear dark line that really helps separating both lips from each other. Okay, here I'm just going to clean the bottom lip by just erasing some tiny but nevertheless unnecessary parts. Now this is of course just one side of the mouth, so to mirror this to the other side, we're going to select all the 3 layers and drag them down to the new layers button. And now that we have these duplicates, we just need to go to Edit, Transform, and Flip Horizontal. Now with the Move tool, remember, you can press and hold Shift to move it on a straight line. Now this next step will only apply to center images like this one. The kind of image where you have to make sure that everything is perfectly centered. So what I do is that I like to go to Image, Image Rotation, and Flip Canvas Horizontal. So the reason I flip the image is because it's very apparent when something's not perfectly centered. So I like to keep flipping the image and moving the mouth until I find that perfect spot when everything is centered. Okay, the thing is that now we have twice the layers that we actually need. So I'm just going to click on one, then Control click on the second one, and then just right click to select the option of Merge Layers. And I can then just correct the name real quick, and we can do the same for the rest of the layers. Okay, so here once again for the layers we have the middle, the top lip, and the bottom lip. So now we are going to turn on the clipping mask. So we select the top lip and just click on this button right here. So as long as you keep this clipping mask activated, you are only allowed to paint inside that specific shape. So if I turn this off like this, you will see that I will be painting over all the drawing, over everything. But for these next steps, it's very important that we keep the clipping mask on. Now to start with the shading, I'm going to be painting with this big soft brush. And I feel like it's very important to start with very subtle shading. As you can see here, I'm not painting with anything too bright or anything too dark. It's just a matter at the beginning to just start building the shading from the ground up. For the bottom lip, we're doing the same. We activate the clipping mask and we pick a slightly darker color. Again, the point is to start building some volume. You don't have to yet worry about any specific details, or how I said before, you don't have to worry about painting anything too dark or too bright just yet. Now for the middle layer, I'm going to make a blurred version of the same layer and put it behind the original. So for that, I just have to duplicate the layer by dragging it here to the new layers button. Now first, I'm going to place this layer below the original, and then we can go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. Again, the idea for this specific layer is that I don't want the middle layer to look too sharp. So this is actually a very quick way of making this nice gradient without having to paint it from scratch. Okay, so now we are going to make a duplicate for the top lip. And again, I'm going to place it below the original. Now with the move tool and with the arrow keys, I'm just moving this layer a few pixels up. Now for the next step, just make sure that the clipping mask is on. Now what I'm doing here is that I'm going to paint this layer with a bright white color. So this way, as you can see, I have a plain white version of the lip behind the original. And the whole reason I'm doing this is just to have this bright bevel edge on the top of the lip. Now I want to show you a very quick technical issue that you might run into, and it can be very stressful if you don't know what it is. So on this layer, as you can see, we have the clipping mask on, and if we go to filter and we try to add some blur effect, you can see that essentially nothing's happening. No matter how much blur we try to apply, it will always look the same. This is only because the clipping mask is activated, as you can easily tell by this lock icon right here. So yeah, pretty much just remember that you need to deactivate the clipping mask if you want to add blur to your layers. So as you can see, now it's working, and I'm going to set it up to a radius of 3 and just hit OK. So this is working very well, so I'm doing the same for the bottom lip. So we duplicate the layer, and again, remember that it's very important that the new one is below the original layer. And don't forget to deactivate the clipping mask, so we are able to apply the blur effect. Now I'm just going to erase some very small parts of the lip that we don't really need. And again, here there's actually a possible issue that you might run into. So if the clipping mask is on, you are not able to erase the main shape of the layer. So remember that if you need to erase something, you can just for a moment deactivate the clipping mask, erase what you need to erase, and then activate it back again. Okay, now we're going to add a little more detail to the lips. And a good trick that I like to use is that I'm gonna make a new layer, but I'm going to make it follow the clipping mask from the layer below. And to do that, you just have to press Alt and click on the middle of both layers. This means that whatever I paint on this layer, it will always follow the clipping mask from the layer below. And if you noticed, you will see that now this layer has a small arrow pointing down. That means that whatever I paint on this layer, it will always follow the clipping mask from the layer below. Now I just need to integrate a little more the lips with the skin. So I'm going to actually pick the same color of the skin and just paint this soft edge above the lip. And the reason I do this one is because it makes a nice transition from the colors of the lip to the colors of the skin. So it kind of takes away that sharpness of the lip, and it makes it look much softer. And now we can try the same for the bottom lip. So again, we just have to create a new layer above the bottom lip. And remember, as we did before, if you want this layer to follow the clipping mask from the layer below, you can just press the Alt key and click on the middle of both layers. And by doing that, I can just paint a few small shadows. Now the very important thing about this method is that when you use a regular clipping mask, that only works for that one specific layer. But if you do it this way, you can have multiple layers following the same clipping mask. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm adding a second layer, and both of them are now following the same clipping mask, the one from the bottom lip. Now next, we are going to work on the speculars. These are, simply put, just small, shiny points of light. And I have been using the soft brush, but since these points have to be a little more defined, I'm going to pick the hair brush. And remember, the whole idea for the speculars is to make it look more like a reflective surface. And that's what I'm doing right here. Okay, now we're going to create a layer for the corners of the mouth. And this one needs to be behind all the rest of the layers. And the goal here with the corners is to make the mouth feel like it's more integrated with the skin. And for that, I can actually just pick one of the colors from the skin shadows. And with a small brush, I'm just going to paint this corner right here. Now I can just duplicate, flip, and move this layer for the second corner. Now for convenience, I'm just going to merge these two corners into one layer. Now I'm just going to add some blur to this layer. But the thing sometimes with these effects is that they're kind of irreversible. So what I do sometimes is that just to save as a backup, I duplicate the layer and just hide it. This is just in case that I don't like what I do or I make some mistake, that I can just go back to the latest version. So now that we have the backup, we can just go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. I'm going to keep it at 3 and just apply the effect. Okay, here I'm just slightly moving the layer to see where it works best. And then I'm just going to erase some of the parts from the top. Okay, so now I'm going to the top of all the layers and I'm going to create a new one and name it Gloss. And for this one, I'm going to pick the brush named Air Dust. And this one basically just makes it very easy to make these nice particles. And again, you can find this brush on the link below. Now after I make these particles, I usually grab an eraser and just tone down the ones that are more on the shadow areas. So yeah, just try to paint these particles more on the brighter section of the lips. Okay, so now we're going to take the top lip and just add some blur to it. And remember, before we apply blur to a layer, we have to deactivate the clipping mask. And for this one, it's nothing big, I just need a very subtle effect to make the lip look softer. So I'm just gonna keep it at 1 and just hit OK. And for the bottom lip, we need the same effect. And since we already did it, you can just click right here on the top. Now we are pretty much done with the mouth, but for the final touch, we're just gonna keep adding more detail to the skin. So I'm gonna take a soft brush and just keep adding more detail. Now this again, it just helps the lips to feel more integrated with the skin. Now for the final step, I just want to add some glow to the specular layer. So as we have done before, I just have to duplicate the layer, move it below, and just add some blur to it. So that's it for this tutorial. I really hope you learned something. Don't hesitate to leave any questions if you have any, and I'll be seeing you on the next tutorial. Bye bye.